So your Miami Dolphins have their men. The new general manager, Jon-Eric Sullivan. The new coach, Jeff Hafley. Are you impressed? What's going on, Dolphins fans? Welcome to this week's edition of Dolphins Deep Dive with Perk. I am Chris Perkins, your host, your South Florida Sun Sentinel Miami Dolphins columnist. That is Dave Hyde. He is your Sun Sentinel columnist. Dave Hyde has been to the national championship game. He's been doing all over the place. Hyde, what is the tone of sports here in South Florida right now, specifically on football, specifically the Miami Dolphins?
Well, specifically the Dolphins did they get it right this time? That's going to be the topic of conversation. But, we had the national championship game here, great game. And a lot of NFL people there. Tom Brady's there on the sidelines looking at Fernando Mendoza. And they have to take him. Have to take them with the Raiders with the number one pick. There were a lot of other NFL people down there that you saw too, so the Dolphins with the 11th pick. Will Ruben Bain be there for them? They need an edge rusher. The guy who's talking to a couple scouts this past week about this game is Akeem Mesidor, the other pass rusher. Does he get into the first round? I mean, there's talk of both Miami pass rushers will go in the first round, so we'll see.
Hi, let me ask you before we get into Dolphins and continue the show, where are the Dolphins in the big picture here? The Panthers are the two-time defending champs. They just had the great event out at Marlins Park, the outdoor skate. The Marlins have made a couple of interesting signings, although I don't think they're in danger of passing the Dolphins anytime soon. But has momentum. Inter Miami has some momentum. They're not going to pass the Dolphins. But where are the Dolphins in the landscape of South Florida sports right now, do you think?
Oh, they're number one. They can go 0-16 or 0-17 even, and they'd be number one. I mean, that's the NFL. It's South Florida. Now, in the moment of June when the Panthers are in the Stanley Cup Finals, or they're the topic of conversation, when the national championship going on, the Hurricanes are the topic of conversation. But there's a difference between topic of conversation and being, have your flag planted atop the mountain. And that's, they're just ahead. I wish it wasn't the case, to be honest with you. I wish the best run organizations would be number one, because it's fascinating to be around a team like the Panthers, such a well-run organization. They have 40% of their rosters on the IR, including 4 of their top 6 players. They've missed much of this year, and they're still fighting for a playoff. It's a fascinating franchise. Can the Dolphins get there? That's really going to be this offseason and really through next season to see where we are.
Right, and that's going to be a big topic of this show as we continue going through it. We want to welcome our viewers that are watching on YouTube. We want to invite you to leave a thought, question, comment on our live chat, the best place to get intelligent sports conversation in South Florida. We also want to remind you that if you missed any part of this live show, you can catch the podcast on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And we want you to sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Fans Flash, which you can do by scanning the QR code that will be shown on your screen. Now, getting to Dolphins. They do have their men, and Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley. Are you excited? Did they make the right choice? That's one thing we will be talking about today. Also, what should the Dolphins do at quarterback? We don't know how Jon-Eric Sullivan or Jeff Hafley feels about the season, whether they view this as a rebuild or we need to win immediately. We will find out part of that tomorrow at 11 when they address the media. But what will their philosophy be at quarterback? What should their philosophy be at quarterback? We will discuss that. Also, how long before the Dolphins make a playoff appearance? We've seen all these quick turnarounds, whether you go starting with Detroit with Dan Campbell, or you go up to Liam Cohen with Jacksonville, through to Ben Johnson with Chicago, Vrabel in New England. Is the clock accelerated on the Dolphins because of some of these recent successes? And then finally, we heard Jon-Eric Sullivan talk about who should form the core of the team. Who do you think should form the core of the team and why. We will get into all of that and more today. As we always say, there's an ocean of possibilities. Let's dive in. All right, Dave Hyde. So, we were talking about whether the Dolphins got it right and their their spot on the local landscape here. I know fans are frustrated. Um, does this hire inspire confidence in you, either the duo of Jon-Eric Sullivan or the coaching hire of Jeff Hafley?
To me, that's not the question. Okay, the question, because we don't know these guys. Look, the same people saying these are great hires were the same people saying Mike McDaniel was a great hire. And you can go down the line because you can look at parts of their resume and say, okay, I get why they did it. I get why they did it. And there's also, they're jumping into the unknown. Okay, Hafley's never been an NFL coach. Sullivan's never been run a team. Okay, now here's where I put my stock in what they got right. Finally got it right, because that's culture, which was they cleared the decks of the franchise. Okay, GM, head coach, and out of desperation, they got to clear the deck of the quarterback too, because they don't have one. Okay, so and then what do? You go and you hire the most important person in the franchise, in any franchise, but especially one that's got to rebuild. And that's the talent evaluator. Whatever title you want to use for, is he the coach? Is he the GM? Because you can see it across the league. They have different titles and it's different people in different franchises. But this franchise decided our GM is going to run he's going to be the talent evaluator. That's his background. That's what and they went out and they, to their mind and interview and process, hired who they think is the best guy. So there's the optimism. It doesn't mean he's the best guy. It doesn't mean it's an inspired hire, but I understand for the first time in years how they went about it. We need the talent evaluator to be the best guy. We're just not going to say, Chris Greer, here, you run the show. You run this for the 10 years. We don't, okay. Mike Tannenbaum, you run it. No, and you inherit the coach and all that. No. So I get it, and that's what I applaud them for.
I like kind of the casualness that you say, Chris Greer, you run it.
That's how it was. And you keep running it. No matter what you do, GM for life. He had 9 lives, okay? I should have said GM for 9 lives.
He did, and I'll tell you this, a couple of things that, I like the hire. I give it a thumbs up, whether you're talking about Hafley or Jon-Eric Sullivan, but specifically Hafley, because I think that Jon-Eric Sullivan showed some conviction when Sean McDermott became available. It wasn't let's go talk to Sean or let's see if Sean is interested, which they might have done. They might have done the due diligence. But to me, I thought they showed some conviction that Hafley is our guy. This is the one that we're committed to. He's the right person for the job. Let's hire Hafley. I like that commitment. Beyond that, Hyde, what I've said is I'm not so much concerned with the who, but the what. When you talk about the head coach, and the what is bringing a new mentality and a new attitude. No more participation trophies. No more of this stuff where you celebrate statistical achievements like having the number 1 offense in the league. Celebrate playoff victories. And that is the mentality this organization needs. I think that's the thing that Liam Cohen has brought to Jacksonville. I think that's the thing that Ben Johnson has brought to Chicago. You can definitely say Vrabel has brought that to New England, right? It's an attitude, it's a mentality. And I think that if they got that right, that's going to be a successful hire. So, time will tell us if they got that right. But to me, over talent, over scheme, over everything else, you need a new mentality all throughout the organization, starting with Steve Ross, by the way. And let's talk some Steve Ross for a quick second here, Hyde. I'm glad that the Dolphins did get it right with the clean sweep when we talk about changing everybody in the organization, GM, coach, and we think quarterback. I'm a little bit troubled that Steve Ross kept Mike McDaniel there through Thursday, January 8th, right? And, Mike McDaniel, if we listen to Darren Waller's version of it, Mike McDaniel, during the exit interview with Waller, told Waller, we want him back. So here's the mentality of Steve Ross is bringing Mike McDaniel back. Mike McDaniel is bringing injured 34-year-old tight end Darren Waller back. It ended up working out, but I'm a little worried that they can't overcome themselves. Am I reading way too much into that? Because they did get it right in the end.
No, you're the process of separation was so wrong. I mean,
Correct.
Monday they had weeks to talk to McDaniel, to look at McDaniel, decide this gang of six running the Dolphins, and ultimately Ross and Daniel Silman. Let's be honest, Daniel Silman was point man for the GM hire. Okay, he's the one who did all the legwork, the interviews, talking to people, who we're going to bring in. He's the successor here, and here's the hope if you're a Dolphin fan, really, because Steve Ross hasn't made a good football hire. Okay, and this the way this played out was, I mean, let's face it, it was amateur hour. Okay, you fire the coach on Monday. Okay, Steve Ross wanted to meet with him on Tuesday. Okay, so he met with him on Tuesday. And then he doesn't fire him until Thursday. Right. I mean, that was wrong for everybody. It was wrong because then John Harbaugh comes available, and everybody, they fired him because Harbaugh's available. When once the dust settled and you could talk to people inside the team, they said, no, that's not what happened. It was basically just Steve delayed and delayed and delayed. And, again, I get it's a tough decision to fire people. But you know what? Mike McDaniel fired people all along the way. Right. Assistant coaches,
right.
Defensive coordinator. That's just part of this strange world they live in. And Mike landed on his feet, as everybody knew, and he's in a great spot for him, I think. Offensive coordinator of the Chargers. That's a good spot.
He is. And so, I agree. They seem to have bungled this thing. And look, the fact that Steve Ross knocked on the door or kicked in the door, as Waller said, while they were conversing, Waller and McDaniel, I'm not that concerned about that. I'm sure Mike McDaniel has had to cut people at inopportune times. I don't know. Maybe they were, at a baby shower and they got a call or something like that, a family event. And you got a call. Hey, you're getting cut. That happens. I'm just more concerned that Mike McDaniel was still there on Thursday in his role and thinking he was going to have something to do with finding the next GM. Let me ask you this, Dave Hyde, because we're bringing up Steve Ross. We've seen other owners speaking and addressing their fans recently, whether you're talking about Baltimore or Buffalo, wherever. Does Steve Ross need to speak to Dolphins fans? Is there anything Steve Ross can say to Dolphins fans to kind of, make up for the past few years and instill confidence in the future? How do the Dolphins handle this from that standpoint, from the standpoint of management speaking to fans, management?
They don't want to put him out. On the other hand, he's been on live TV.
Right, Bloomberg.
Let's face but, more than Steve Ross, I'd like to hear Daniel Silman. I'd like to hear what his thoughts are, because really we're going to be saying Steve Ross, but the transition is undergoing. And it's, I heard about 8 months ago that Daniel Silman has been in the building for a couple years, meeting with and doing a deep dive, not deep dive with Perk, but a deep dive into various segments of the Dolphins, finances, personnel, so to understand the business. And the keys were being passed. The keys of the franchise were going to him. He has a sports background, the entrepreneurial background of bringing European international soccer teams to the U.S. on their tours. Who is he? You can read who he is, but what's his thoughts? That's because he's the future. He's what's taking over right now, and I'd like to hear him talk.
Yeah, I would agree. There's nothing to me that Steve Ross can say to soothe the fans' frustration or anger, but I think ownership, whether it's Steve Ross, Tom Garfinkel, Dan Silman, somebody owes the fans a statement. Should let the fans know change is coming, or change is here, really, not coming. Change is here. Here's what we're thinking. Here's why we did it. Here's what we want to deliver to you in the future. We're working hard on your behalf. We're not just here collecting your money, holding F1 events and tennis and national college football championships. The Dolphins are our number one concern. We care greatly, and we're working on your behalf to bring you a Super Bowl title. I think that's kind of what fans want to hear.
I'd also like to just ask a question. Hey, give us the receipts on the Tua draft. Who was?
No, that's what they want to avoid right there. They don't want to look back. They want to look ahead with a positive.
My thought is, you can't just brush stuff like that under the rug. You should talk about it. Now, how you want to talk about it is up to you. But then again, I have a column to write, and that's my thoughts.
Right. I would say, Dave, on a serious note, though, that is kind of the dilemma for the Dolphins, right? Because, somebody needs to answer for what's happened over the past few years. But if you're the Dolphins, maybe your strategy is, you put Silman up there and he says, I wasn't here. I'm not responsible. I'm not looking back. Maybe it's that simple. But I think that somebody from ownership does need to address the thing.
To explain how Tua was given this contract.
Oof. That's what they want to avoid. That's what they want to avoid. But that's what I want to hear.
That's moving forward, too, because they are handcuffed in some respects for this next season, in good part because of the Tua contract. Okay,
I agree. As a journalist, I definitely 100% would ask that question, and I want to get an answer for that question, an explanation. They owe it to the fans more than they owe it to me as a journalist. They owe it to the fans, and that's what I hope the Dolphins understand here. You're asking the fans for their money, for their time, for their passion, for their attention. You owe them an explanation for what's been going on for these past few years. Before we get it going any further, I want to say what's up to Nicolero. I think that's right. CLD, Pretty Boy, Blackjack Green. Hi, real quick. Pretty Boy says, we are the Miami Packers, but I'm okay with it because the Packers are a winning organization. Are the Dolphins the Miami Packers?
I mean, yeah. Look at Sullivan's whole career has been inside the Packers. So, he's bringing up what he knows, and he knows Packers. And who'd he hire? A guy in the building with the Packers. So, I get that. They're Packers South. And, a lot of the things the Packers do, everybody would go, okay, that's better. They've been doing it better than the Dolphins, but most every team has. Okay, let's be honest. But it's a good organization, good winning organization. So, sure, if you're the Packers, you'd be happy right now. The Dolphins did get Joe Philbin from the Packers, but that's a different story. Here's a couple of fan reactions back to back here. Dave Wallace, I'm very happy about the hire. Bigote 1775 has a thumbs down emoji to the Dolphins hires. And Pretty Boy chimes back in with saying, well, I will save that for the next segment. But where do you think the fans should be on this hire? Should they pass judgment, or should they be like wait and see here? I think you're wait and see. I mean, if you look at their background, you say, okay, you see how they can succeed. If you look at the Dolphins' past several hires, you say, I'm going to wait and see. And I get there's the big thing with Hafley is he's a first timer. Okay, first time coach. And, oh, my God, look at Tony Sperano, Joe Philbin, Adam Gase, Brian Flores, Mike McDaniel, all first time. And certainly with McDaniel, it was a long learning curve on how to be head coach. Okay, I'm not sure if he's there yet, but he learned a lot of what he shouldn't do. Okay, he got walked on by players. Okay, and he admitted it. They're late to meetings. I couldn't do anything. You don't know with the first-time coach. That said, and I wrote about this in my column, the 8 finalists last weekend in the NFL. These are the contenders. These are the actual contenders for the Super Bowl. Okay, forget all the other these are the ones who made it into full contention. 6 of them are first-time coaches. Okay, so you can't just say no first-time coach. There's all different ways up the mountain. First-time veteran, recycled, offense, defense, tough guy. Although there's not many tough guys left in the league.
No.
But then again, you can't be just the guy that you get walked over and say, I'm a player's teammate like Mike McDaniel did. And he realized that by the end. Again, there's a lot of ways up the mountain, and we'll see which route Hafley takes.
Yeah, and I think Mike McDaniel going out to the LA Chargers to be their offensive coordinator and getting with Jim Harbaugh can help them, learn some toughness and player relations. And it's not all about toughness. It's about less player empowerment, when to listen to the players and why, that kind of thing. I think when
they've earned it, when they've earned listening to.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And the Dolphins, they didn't earn it.
Right. I agree. What's up to Mel B. Crazy, to Dorian Sims, Dave Harbor checking in from San Diego, Dead Streak, Rashawn Brockenbow, JD the Great One. Let's see, Dave Wallace, Billy Batson. Let's see, who else is in here? Chuck Cole. Chuck Cole checks in and says, with the other quick turnarounds, I believe all those already had a good or even franchise quarterback. I will say this. I don't know that was proven for all of those teams. Like Trevor Lawrence was paid like a franchise quarterback, but was he? What did you really think about Caleb Williams? Drake May got off to a good start. So did C.J. Stroud. I don't necessarily know that quarterback is the number one key. It's a main key. It's a major key. I'm not sure it's the number one key. As you say, there's a lot of ways to get up the mountain. I think that's what this year, the last couple of years are showing us, right? Because I think what's out is just a high-scoring team. You have to be able to play some defense. You have to have some good coaching. Do you think the league is changing in that course, Dave, that there are multiple ways up the mountain the last 2, 3, 4 years, which I know includes 2 Kansas City championships?
Yeah, to me, the quarterback's always number one. It's always the number one question. It's always the number one issue.
I agree.
To your point, the league has shifted. 5 years ago, maybe it was a lot of downfield passing.
Right.
And trying to be an explosive offense, and that's what you needed. And now it is. You look at the teams. What May had he's not a good example because he does throw downfield. But a lot of these quarterbacks with high percentage passing, it's because they're dink and dunk and extended ball control offenses with the passing game. So the way to go about it has now, at some point, it'll shift back, and the running games are in now. Okay.
Right.
It's a constant cycle of teams changing and who won and who won, everybody starts to follow. But until you have a quarterback, you can't have sustained winning. You can win in a year. You can win any year if your defense is great and your offensive line is powerful. But to have sustained winning, you needed that quarterback.
Right. And that leads us into our next segment. What should the Dolphins do at quarterback? Ohio John 80 checks in and says, in 3 years, we should have a franchise quarterback and playoff win. Ohio John, let me say this. I'm down with the second one more than the first one. In 3 years, you should have a playoff win. Whether it's with your franchise quarterback, I don't know, but you should have a solid starting quarterback in 3 years. I'll put it to you like that. What do you think about that? In 3 years, franchise quarterback and playoff win, and what should the Dolphins do at quarterback?
Well, that should be the plan. That's what they should plan. And here's what, you look at lessons learned. Okay, lessons learned. Don't draft a quarterback and sit on him for 6 years and say he's our guy, and hoping and praying he's our guy. He's our guy. Here's our plan. We're going to cross our fingers. He's our guy. Keep going for a quarterback. And what I would do this offseason, okay, Ewers, who knows? I mean, is he a career backup? Could he? Don't put a ceiling on him. Okay, just see what he does. But then I'm also going and getting a veteran. This is a veteran. You wrote about Malik Willis. We've talked about Malik Willis. Fascinating name, fascinating talent. What's the price tag going to be? And I would get him or a Mac Jones or somebody like that. And then I'd draft one too and say, throw him against the wall, and can you get one? Do you get lucky? Okay, and if not, next year, I'm coming. Here's going to be the talk next year, and it started already talking in the past week with NFL people. What is Lamar Jackson going to do in Baltimore?
Right.
Okay, is he going to? Is he? There's all whispers he wants to get to South Florida. Next year would be a opening for him depending on what he decides contractually. And so, if the Dolphins, you can't plan that way, but you have that's one of hopefully a dozen possibilities you could take. But I got my plan this offseason: get a veteran, draft one, and have Quinn Ewers, let him go at it.
Yeah. We want to say what's up to Evan Langley. John Gordon checks in and says, until quarterback contracts come down to the reality of cap space, having a quarterback on a rookie deal is probably the best chance to turn around fast. Yeah. You're right, John, but we have seen Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield and Daniel Jones have limited success. None of them have won a Super Bowl, but that's kind of there's a best business practice. But as Hyde said, there's other ways up the mountain. And I hope the Dolphins aren't all or nothing on quarterback this year, meaning I hope they don't feel like this is the year they need to get the franchise quarterback, because I don't think this is the year to get the franchise quarterback. The field is limited in the draft, in free agency, on your current roster. Now, it doesn't mean that person is not out there. The answer could be in the third round, correct? I mean, Dak Prescott was a fourth rounder. I'm not going to go to the Tom Brady, Brock Purdy, sixth and seventh round.
You can go to New Orleans. You can go to New Orleans with
Tyler Shough.
Second rounder.
Right.
I mean, the point is you got to keep plumbing and fishing and trying. You can't just say, oh, let's keep Tua or let's keep Ryan Tannehill for years and years and years and hope he works out.
Yeah, I agree with that. You got to keep going. Danny Martin asks, do they bring in Malik Willis? Jake Harris says Malik Willis, draft a guy, Ewers, let them compete, maybe even someone like Mac Jones. That's what you just said. And then CLD asks, are there any quarterbacks that could be free agents in 28 or 29 to sign? You can take any of that, Hyde. Do you want to go till 28 or 29? I think you got to find.
We're moving on from this regime. Look at the way the NFL's working. You got 3 years.
Right.
That's the time. And then by year 3, you're on borrowed time in year 4. Okay. And I think there's 19 openings in the last 2 years. Coaches open. We're talking coaches. Incredible. The GMs they survive a little longer as we just look at this franchise. But 19 openings. Now, why is that? Why is that? Here's my pet theory on why that is.
Yep.
There's so much money in the NFL right now. The owners will eat a contract very quickly right now and not really worry about it and refresh the fan base most of the time. And with the new hires and rather than just continually writing out somebody or a staff or a coach that people aren't excited about.
I think you're right on that point, and I think it's easy to sell hope in the NFL. And really, if you're around that 8, 9, 10 win mark, you can always sell hope. And if it's not working out for you, you can change coaches and sell more hope. And so I think the runs for guys like Tomlin and Harbaugh, if you aren't doing the Andy Reid thing, if you aren't getting titles, you're going to be like McDermott. You're gonna have the shorter run at it, and I think owners are going to make a change. Fans are less patient nowadays, but I think part of selling hope nowadays is a new beginning and a new coach. It's not like Philly with Andy Reid back in the day, right? With McNabb, that we're going to break through. It's not what we just saw with Buffalo. It's not what we just saw with Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson. I think it's, Dan Campbell, that clock is ticking on Dan Campbell and that regime. So I think that's more of what we're going to see nowadays. Bigote 1775 says, cough, cough, Troy Aikman. I don't know what he's talking about, but I do want to pick your brain on what do you think Aikman's influence was and has been, GM, head coach, and the future of the quarterback position? Is he being consulted on the future of the quarterback position, do you think? How much influence do you think Aikman has had in the offseason here?
Well, there's a difference, okay? The GMs are behind the curtain. Okay, all that works behind the curtain. You don't have film on them. You can't break them down, and so you got to talk to people. You have to have relationships with either owners or other GMs to know, okay, who's really making the decisions. What's this guy like to work with, et cetera, et cetera. So Aikman was an outside voice on a franchise that really needed an outside voice to come in and help them. Everybody knows the story. He meets with teams. Now, how many front office hierarchy he met, I don't know. But he brought that outside voice and some league-wide knowledge that the franchise needed. I don't think and that's with the coach too. Okay. Now, quarterback, you're going to have your coach, you have your quarterback coach. You're going to have 20. Offensive coaches, you're going to have film, you're going to have the Senior Bowl, the Combine. You better do your background checks. You bet Dolphins. Don't forget about the back. I'm not sure. Troy Aikman's necessary in the quarterback. Sure, why not hear his voice? But there's a lot more open and accessible ways to evaluate what you're getting there.
I want to say what's up to Mark Heavy. What's up to Grandizer 12? Only the real survive. Chris the bartender checking in. Scott Ayers, when we're talking about quarterback, says Malik is 6'1", seems undersized considering likely to get hit a ton. What are your thoughts on that, Hyde? Because we are seeing some, I don't know if you could say that Baker Mayfield, because of his slight build, the beating, got to him a little bit more. You could probably make that argument with Tua. Is that a good point?
Well, Malik and Baker Mayfield are in a different stratosphere as athletes than Tua. Okay, meaning they can run. They can throw on the run. They can create on the run. But this is a situation. You hired two guys from Green Bay who worked with Malik Willis every day. Okay. Yep. And let's not make the mistake some of us did. I think I did probably when they hired Joe Philbin, and we didn't know Joe Philbin. They're bringing him from New York. Matt Flynn had just thrown 6 touchdowns, I think, his last game. And in Green Bay as a backup. And hey, they could bring in Matt Flynn. Well, knowing somebody doesn't mean you like somebody, okay? And Joe obviously didn't push for Matt Flynn. He went to Seattle and got beat out by Russell Wilson. But so we'll see. This will be their first question. It's part of their first question because even if they like him, if a lot of teams like him, what's the price tag? And can I talked to one former GM at the end of this Dolphins season and said, what do you think of Malik Willis? And he said, I like him. I go, how much are you going to cost? He goes, north of $30 million a year. And that was more than I expected. But the point being, there's one quarterback in the draft that everybody likes. Okay. There's Mac Jones and Malik Willis look to be the two names as far as, veterans trying to reinvent themselves. And that. So What's the price tag going to be? But it starts with, what do these Green Bay guys think of him?
Yeah, it does. That's exactly where it starts because, even though Hafley was the defensive coordinator, he saw Malik Willis all the time, and Sullivan as the vice president of player personnel, he knew Willis very, very closely. His development and all that kind of stuff, drafting him and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to tell us if they offer him a contract, if they pursue him, it will tell us what they think of him and how much they think that he's worth. It will tell us those two things. And I think you have to kind of trust their judgment on Malik Willis.
Here's what I like, Perk. Here's what I like, Perk, about that. We're talking bringing in the Green Bay way, right? The Green Bay way is they had Jordan Love and they went out and they got Malik Willis and said when his stock was way down out of Tennessee, okay, and said we're going to bring him in here. So that's what I like. They're going after. They're trying to stock the quarterback room.
Yeah, you're right. And that is the Green Bay way that, I'm not a literally draft a quarterback every year guy, but it's a good idea to keep refreshing. I definitely agree with keep refreshing. Don't get overly complacent there. Fred Walter checks in with Miami won't be able to afford Malik Willis. Sean Heller checks in. I saw something else on here that I wanted to cover while we're talking quarterback here. Chris L. Says draft Chambliss if available. That's the Ole Miss quarterback. But there's Drew Aller of Penn State. I think I had a little list here.
Simpson of Alabama is out there.
Ty Simpson of Alabama, Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, Cade Klubnik of Clemson. Would you like to draft a third-round quarterback? I don't know where these guys go, but the Dolphins have 3 third-round picks.
Yeah, assuming they like somebody in that area. Yes, I absolutely. We take a shot because of the value of the position and the position you're in. Now, if they go out and then they, Malik Willis, they set him up for years. But at somewhere in the draft, they need to get draft a quarterback, and I think the third round, as they're shot, unless they're 100% sold on Malik Willis, and that happens, absolutely, I'd be looking there.
Yeah, did I call him Chris Chambliss from Ole Miss? It's Trinidad Chambliss. I might have called him
Chris Chambliss, the old Yankees.
I think I might have first baseman. Yeah, I think I might have. Anyway, so
not like me. I do that all the time. I'm constantly.
Right, it just shows age. It shows age in a couple of ways, and none of them are good. All right, so let's go to our next segment. It's how long before a Dolphins playoff appearance? And we have kind of touched on this earlier in the show, and you have to put a clock on this thing, though. I mean, it's not fair, but you do have to put a clock on it, and I think that 3 years. 3 years for, I would almost say 3 years for a playoff win, but we're talking playoff appearance. It's two different things. I say probably 2027, not that anybody should get fired if they don't make a playoff appearance in the next 2 years, because that's only 2 years, 2027, obviously. But I say appearance 2 years, and that's because of what's going on in the league here, Dave Hyde, with all these turnarounds. I'm not saying they have to sustain and make playoff appearances in 3 of the next 4 years and go to the AFC Championship, but making a playoff appearance, when you look at what's happened in Detroit, and Chicago, and New England, and Jacksonville, and Denver, and Houston, and all these places that have turned it around. Indianapolis is not a good example because Jones got the Achilles injury. But there are quick turnarounds happening all around the league. Am I being unrealistic? Should that same thing apply to the Dolphins' new regime?
Well, I mean, you get 3 years, okay? The clock's ticking. Okay, before now, I will say this is the worst situation I've seen anybody step into in the Dolphins, okay? The roster, I mean, in that House interview that they did, that Sullivan listed the players that he's banking on, and it was like a handful. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
They don't have a quarterback. They're in salary cap prison. So it's not a good situation that these guys are stepping into. So to say, what year will they get a playoff win? I mean, that's like we're in the middle of a snowstorm in January and saying, when's the temperature going to be, sunny and green grass? Well, somewhere out there. It's somewhere.
Right.
My point is, do they progressively build every year? You look at Mike McDaniel or most of these guys step in. The first year they coached was the best year with the Dolphins. Okay.
Yeah.
Adam Gase side, because that was a whole different, the tank and all that skewed everything. But Mike McDaniel got progressively worse each year,
right,
as far as steps and belief and Tony Soprano, Joe Philbin, Adam Gase, same. So they have to progressively build here, and if that means year 2 they're in the playoff, year 3, year 4 they have a playoff win. I don't know, but you want to feel that they're building something.
I want to say what's up to I Got Game AJ. What's up to Jack Thompson? What's up to Jake Harris? Dr. Knock Boots. I like that. Dean Rodriguez. Dean Rodriguez says, I don't think I can handle another Patriots dynasty during my lifetime.
Tell me about it.
New England, look at what they did, Hyde. Now, I know Drake May and I know Vrabel is proven and blah, blah, blah. But, I'll say this also for the Dolphins. And we talk about the 3 years and what other franchises have done. And you talk about it's not a good job. The clock is also ticking on it's not just on this administration. They inherit the 25-year burden. It's not their fault. But the clock is ticking on that. When are you going to win a playoff game? Really? You want another 3 or 4 freaking years? Like, really? And then the clock is also ticking on fan patience with Steve Ross, right? Not that fans can get Steve Ross out the door, but maybe they stop buying tickets. Maybe they, the Dolphins are always going to rule.
That's not
I know, but that's part of the problem, but that's a different discussion. But fan patience there's a lot of clocks that are ticking here, and so there is a sense of urgency. Well, there better be a sense of urgency. I hope there's a sense of urgency. I hope there's a desperation around that franchise to get to the playoffs very quickly. I'm just running out of excuses why they shouldn't. I mean, Dave, right? Am I being too impatient here?
I'm remembering a Pink Floyd song of all the clocks going off when you're talking about
yeah. Time, right? I think it's time.
Yeah. These guys come in here, they're not thinking of the 25-year burden, and I'm not either, to be honest with you. When they start, sure, it's a different narrative, but I'm curious what these guys do. So I'm not. I didn't put the 25-year burden on McDaniel. But it was part of the franchise's story. So it's still part of the franchise's story. And the bar is so low for the Dolphins that winning a playoff game is seen as the nirvana. It's
right.
Right. I started here, and that was a given. You would win a playoff game. Jimmy Johnson he only won 2 playoff games, and now you'd throw a parade for that. So I don't know when this, what is a realistic timetable. All I know is you get 3 years pretty much before the pressure really starts to mount.
Okay, and so you say that, and I'm looking at some of these comments. Like Jack Thompson says, they don't give a F about fans. True Blazer says the entire AFC East should be embarrassed that the Patriots have lapped them. Jack Thompson checks in again with read the GM statement. He didn't mention the fans once. Bigote 1775, it's all about the dollars and not winning. Fan frustration, like you need to address this. And this gets back to what we said about Steve Ross or Daniel Silman or somebody talking to the fans. Not that words can soothe anything, but the patience of the fans. I don't know that you have 3 or 4 years. Fans are fed up. They've got to understand this. Sullivan and Hafley have to understand this. They don't carry that 25-year burden, but they do. They do shoulder that. I don't know that you have a 3 or 4 year waiting period here, Hyde.
See, I disagree with this, that all they care about is some money. They don't want to win. You know what?
I do, but that's the perception.
Well, it's a wrong perception. That's what we're here to tell people. Steve Ross offered $15 billion for his team, he said. Okay? He has more money than he'll ever spend. You don't think he's concerned that his legacy, for all he's built in development, the number, maybe the world's biggest development company, I think it is, Hudson Yards in New York, building half of Palm Beach County right now. His legacy is just like Wayne Huizenga. For all he did, the legacy was the Dolphins, and with a lot of people. And so it's not money. It's not making right decisions in football. It's as simple as that. Okay, I mean, he's made too many wrong decisions on how to run his team, and he's not alone in that. A lot of these owners, I remember talking to a long-time Super Bowl winning, and I said, Steve Ross doesn't know what he's doing, and I was told no owner does. Okay, now some of them delegate that, or in Robert Kraft's case. And this goes to my point of saying it's the toughest job since I've been here that they're stepping into. The Bills have had Josh Allen. The Patriots are rebuilt. Okay, so you got 2 contenders for the next 5 to 10 years for sure. Okay, sitting above you that you got to somehow take. But Robert Kraft got it. They got lucky in Drake Mayfield. The Dolphins could have been lucky if they'd made the right choice with the quarterback. Okay, and we don't need to constantly replay that. But then they didn't. That gets to Steve Ross's decisions on who's running the franchise and all that stuff. You need football, good football people run. So we'll see whether they got. And the thing I like about this, as I said, they said the talent evaluator is the most important guy. Finally, they've come to that realization, and they hired him before they hired anybody else, and because they didn't want anything getting in the way of that hire. So we'll see if it works.
Okay, let's get into this then. Grandizer 12 says, Perk, but for the most part, the fans will get any explanation and they will still be fans. So it's a waste of time for Ross to say anything. We remember, Dave Hyde, 2000 and 2001 when the Dolphins did not sell out their home playoff games. Fans were kind of frustrated. That was the Jay Fiedler years, Dave Wanstead. That was the last time they won a playoff game. That home playoff game against Indy that they won did not sell out. And back in those days, I think you had to sell out by Thursday at 4 p.m. They had the blackout rule. And so, you always wanted Publix to buy out the rest of the tickets so the game could be televised locally. But the fans were frustrated and they spoke. I think this generation of Dolphins fans, starting with, and I say this generation, this iteration, starting with McDaniel and Tua, just the last few years, Dolphins could have sold them anything. Now, the last few games, we saw that they did stay away. The stadium wasn't packed the last few home games of 2025. I thought the fans were too forgiving. I'm not calling for a fan boycott or anything of that sort, but if you're frustrated, you can't keep buying tickets and buying merchandise and shaking your fist at the heavens. Am I wrong here, Hyde? I don't know what I'm saying to the fans, but I'm saying I know you're going to be a fan. I'm never saying don't cheer for your team. I know you're going to cheer for that name on the front, Dolphins, but at some point, if you're frustrated, I don't know if you can keep giving Steve Ross your money.
Hey, look, I don't know where to go with this kind of, because my thought is,
Right.
fans, you
Right.
do whatever you want. If you want to
Yes.
stay, you enjoy going to the games for whatever reason. You love football, you
Yep.
love the social. Go. If it gets too expensive, don't go. If you're turned off, don't go. I mean, look, fans, I'm good with whatever they want to do with any team, because it's the team. One thing in South Florida, the Dolphins are the exception. At
They are.
least this
They are.
era, is you got to win for the fans to turn out. Okay, the NFL is the exception, but the Panthers were an awful franchise. Nobody went. They were giving away tickets when they lost. The Heat.
But I say this. I say this, Hyde. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you remember the times when the Dolphins and the Heat were putting tarps over sections of seats in the upper deck because it was so empty. That was probably since what, 2000, that both franchises had to
the
do
Dolphins
that.
did. The Dolphins.
Didn't they do that? I thought they did in the early years. When I first moved here in I moved here in '97. I thought in '01 and '02 they were doing that. But the playoff games are the big thing to me. That the fans spoke that way. I know you don't want to. What should fans do to voice frustration? I should say that aside from going to social media, I guess.
Call talk shows. I don't know, Perk. I mean,
Yeah.
they're going to be fans, and I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
However they go, I don't really have a sweeping statement on what fans should or shouldn't do. If you want to go to games, go to games. If you don't go. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, yeah. I think
You're worked up on this, Perk. I can tell. You're worked up on it.
I feel bad for this fan base, and they're loyal and they're almost too believing. And Steve Ross is trying. It's just a whole frustration because I do think
I will say. See, I take a different. Now that I'm thinking about it, and I've written this. I'm just fascinated by the Dolphin fan base, how optimistic they are every year. Every year. Like this past year, I was probably going into the season as disbelieving as I could be that something that was going to work that on a lot of levels. And I wrote them all. And every time I'd get emails, oh, you hater,
Yeah.
you don't believe, you see, this is going to be a great year, and I
Right.
God bless the Dolphin fan. I mean that good for you that you're that optimistic, and because it's just part of your life, it's not like your life's built around the Dolphins. I hope, but you want it to where everybody wants to look. Nobody wants to work more than the writers. As I've said, the Patriots writers write books of their franchise and players and everything, and we write obituaries, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
Franchises.
Yeah. It's such a it's just such a layered situation. When look, you consider the Cubs fans and the Red Sox fans, right? I mean, you talk about
that was lovable. That was a lovable, lovable.
And they were going to the playoffs. They just couldn't win a title.
Yeah, the Red Sox passed the pain. The Cubs fans, isn't it great day games? There's none of that in the NFL. There's nothing lovable about 25 years without.
It's pretty results. It's a pretty results-based league. All right, Hyde, let's put a bow on this and let's talk about who should form the core of the team. And we heard Jon-Eric Sullivan, the GM. He mentioned center Aaron Brewer, running back Devon Achane, wide receiver Jalen Waddle, left tackle Patrick Paul, and linebacker Jordan Brooks.
We could have.
Are you okay with?
We could have said that.
Well,
we said that all.
Okay,
said that all year. Here, who do they have? That's who they have. We know that, right? He's
not
breaking any ground there. What? What's interesting to me is no rookies were named. All these rookies played all these snaps, and they're learning. They're guys right now. Maybe somebody develops.
Right.
You hope, but they're guys after their first year.
You didn't mention. Well, he didn't mention either of the last two first-round picks, Chop Robinson or Kenneth Grant.
Why would he? Why would he? Right? Right, Perk?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Are you being nice?
yes,
Hey, look, you're coming in. You get to set the standard right now. Are you going to be
yeah,
nice and say, "Oh, Chop Robinson, yeah, did nothing this year, but you know what? You're the future." No, set the standard. Maybe you're the future. You better prove you're the future.
yeah, and I do like that. I do like that. I do like that. There's apparently no scholarships here, right? That just because you're a first round pick, I'm not counting on you as a core part of the future. Now you're going to be around because but you have to kind of earn the respect around here.
Well, let's see how his draft picks 2 years from now when he names who's around, whether if he would have a Chop Robinson out there, whether he'd name him or not. I mean, it's easy to say come in and say here's the guys. I could do it. You could do that. Who are they going to build with? There was no surprise in that. Now it's on him. He's got to go out and he's got to draft guys that you can build with. That's it's as simple as that for this franchise.
Are you surprised Zach Sealer and Minka Fitzpatrick were not in there? It's almost as interesting by the omissions as the inclusions. Look,
what are you trying to do here? What are you trying to do? You're not going to win next year.
I don't know.
You're not going to win next year. So if someone comes, I think anybody over what Zach Sealer. I love Zach Sealer. I love everything about him. But how old is he? How old is he? 32 next season?
31 or 2, yeah.
31 and 2. Yeah. That's right at the edge of if you're not going to win for 2 or 3 more years, or what do you do? Right. What do you do with that? And we've been here, and if someone and Minka Fitzpatrick, same thing. I mean, no surprise there to me.
Yeah, I like the players that he chose as the core players because, as I said at the start of the show, I'm big on attitude and mentality. And I think that these are some of the guys that bring that attitude and mentality. Definitely Brewer and Brooks. They bring that attitude and mentality, that nastiness, that competitiveness, that, down and I'm going to have no regrets. And that's the attitude I think that this entire organization needs to take, but specifically the players on the field need to take. Jalen Waddle, I was probably a little bit surprised by his inclusion in there. He's not one of the more intense guys as far as attitude, but he's definitely one of your more talented guys. And his mentality is good. He's a tough guy. He gets knocked around a lot. It's tough to make him miss games. So I do like that about Waddle.
And
right.
He's on a very team-friendly contract at this point. I mean, it's $8
million.
Yes, he is. Counts $8 million. I mean, so I think there's a lot more meat on the bone with somebody like Jalen Waddle. If I'm not down on him. So to me, everybody's he named that core. You could have named the core. I mean, what was surprising about that? There was nothing surprising.
Well,
it's Zach Sealer. Okay, to your point. Yeah. I get that. He would be the one that. And yet you're rebuilding. We've been through this before. Age and money factors into this stuff.
We have. There are other team captains, people with status. Bradley Chubb was not mentioned. Alec Ingold was not mentioned. But both of them are getting older. Chubb has a contract. Ingold, we don't know if the new offensive coordinator is going to use a fullback. So how do we know that he's part of the core? I can see I can see some of these omissions, but I do think that some of them were interesting, and I was glad that. And this is obvious though, but neither Tua nor Tyreek was mentioned. So that's bonus in Jon-Eric stuff like that would have blown the lead.
Yeah, he also in the interview he wasn't asked about Tua. I mean, come on. If you're going to do an actual interview, you got to do that. I'm sure that he wasn't allowed to ask that question, but come on. He's going to be asked about that when he sits in the big boy press conference.
Yeah, Yeah, tomorrow. And yes, so to put a bow on this, that's perfect, Dave Hyde. Tomorrow at 11, we will talk to Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley. I believe that it's going to be streamed live, including possibly on sunsentinel.com. So we will let you know via social, but it'll be Dolphins will stream it live on YouTube. But we will let you know about that. We will probably have something for you next week as far as another show because the coaches are talking this week. Next week, I will be in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. So look for the reports to start coming out about that as we officially shift into draft mode. Until then, we will talk to you. That is Dave Hyde. I'm Chris Perkins. Thanks for watching this edition.